Welcome into another episode of Discard for Magic. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron.
I'm your other host, James or Jaxic, and today we're excited to bring back on Joe Ellis, the CTO and only TO of Plaid Hat Games.
We promised this a while back. You all probably thought it would never happen, but it's happening.
We got stats, and more stats.
Yeah, got a lot of data, and I'm trying to generate more as we talk. We'll see if we get that, because it'd be super fun to get the stuff I'm trying to get right now. I'm excited to look at some numbers with you guys. We discussed we're going to do our best to make this audio only friendly. There should be, once this is released, an Excel file available. So I am going to reference the file so that anybody who does have it can get on the right sheet and see what we're looking at, right? Does that sound good?
Okay.
Sounds good.
If we go to, there's a base deck versus custom sheet. It's like the third one. So this is all games since the beginning of 2024, just to try to get some data that's relevant, but still get enough data that it's significant. Of course, Isle Vekid and Spectral Conclave are just, smaller. They only have like 20 days or whatever to exist. We've got the data, which is definitely showing the filth as being strong.
Yeah, it looks like they're at 56.9%.
Yep, and that is for base decks. In custom, they're even higher. Yeah, they're at 2 out of 3.
Yeah, custom makes sense, especially that recent tournament demonstrating just how strong the filth were. But I'm actually pleasantly surprised to see because last time we talked to you and Colby, I think they were even higher in base, like almost 60. So they've dropped a little bit.
That does sound right. They're clearly the most standout number on there. Although, man, I'm just seeing Shimmer Sea Fae at 41%. That's pretty rough.
Yeah, that looks like the lowest.
It also looks like the Shadow Elves deck building are about as good as filth. They're doing about 67% as well.
Oh, that's funny, considering they also squeaked into the finals of that tournament.
Yeah.
Yep.
One thing I looked at with this stuff was just the custom versus base deck difference, which is kind of interesting to see that.
So, like, which decks get better in custom? And one of those is like Obsidian Dwarves are doing better in custom, probably because Cheez-Its found a cool deck with them.
Shadow Elves are the highest. They're like 20% improvement.
I think Shadow Elves' custom deck makes their deck a little more easy to digest or like have a straightforward game plan, whereas base deck is still very complex.
Sure. And then as far as the stuff that's not new, you'd think Vanguards would improve. Whoever's been using them in those 500 games they've been in.
Oh, wow.
In custom deck games hasn't unlocked them. Because they're 47% overall, 34%. Now, actually, I could tell you, I would have a theory about why that is. So let's actually have you guys go look over. There's a sheet that's just called Top 10%. This is actually the sort of the table I'm most excited about.
Okay.
I went through, got the top 260 or 160, I can't remember. The top 10% of players from Season 6. I looked at Season 6 and Season 7 at games where it's only those players playing each other.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this would be interesting because in the general stats, I have always felt that things are just going to trend towards 50% because there's such a larger gap in player skill, and that's going to just overcome a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so this top 10% stats that I ran show kind of what you would expect it
At like a higher level play.
Yeah, most communities, considering like a tier list or something, would want to consider the high level players. And the differences actually weren't that much, except for a couple standouts. And the biggest one being the Vanguards, who are 46.5% in regular play, on the edge of just being okay, not an emergency. But in the top 10%, they only win 39% of the time. So they do 7% worse.
Jeez.
Under 4 out of 10.
And I'm seeing that Savannah Elves and Cloaks each perform better. They're both like at 55% in the top 10% players compared to like 48 and 51%.
Yeah, Savannah Elves have the best bump for whatever reason. I'm kind of surprised at that.
Because you'd think they're a low complexity deck, yeah.
They could be a deck that surprises you, so even two new players, I would usually probably give the edge to the Savannah Elves. But no, they do way better. And I think Fallen Kingdom is also a lot better. They go from 47 to 52.8.
Yeah, I blame Eerie and Dark Tomy. And then you also have a similar thing going on with Shimmer Sea Fae actually being better among the top 10%. They go from a 40.6% to 44%.
Yeah, they become more viable. Obsidian Door's better, but that's another one where I thought those would be better among worse players, because even if you don't know what you're doing, you can still find the epic and be like, oh, here's a bunch of damage. And the other player might not even know about the card or forget about it, but no, like it's for whatever reason they're able to pull something off with it better.
And then Shadow Elves actually go down, which is weird. Some of the people are saying with Shadow Elves, we think there's maybe actually it's even lower than the top 10%. It's like 10 players with Shadow Elves you really have to watch out for.
The top 1% with Shadow Elves is like really good, and then the rest of us are like, how do these work?
Now, what this is not, which would be something else to figure out, although it would be a way more complex database. It's not the top 10% Vanguard's players, and you know what I mean? It's just the top 10% overall. So that would be a whole other thing. Maybe that would be the more complete information.
That would make, I think it a bit more complete, because there could be some players who, like myself, for example, I don't do very well with Shadow Elves, but I'm probably in the top 10% of like overall. Like some players might just struggle with certain decks, and
of course, usually for the top 10% players, they're playing their best decks the most. Would make some difference. If you just put like the top 50 players for each faction and see how they did,
Yeah, there's still a couple players in the community, and they're probably in the top 10% who I think still completely just do random. So
nice.
Whatever the spinner tells them to play is what they play.
That's great.
I know that Mr. Baggins does that.
Yeah.
Now, as you guys, because you're both in that elite Plaid, I've certainly never been close to it. Does Savannah Elves having the biggest uptick, not just the biggest uptick, but it actually puts them really close to the Filth. The Filth are pretty much identical with all players in top 10. But still the highest, 56.7% for top 10% matchups. But Savannah Elves are at 55, so they're the two. It looks like them and the Cloaks. Those would be sort of your S tier, just by going purely by these numbers, right? So does that feel right to you guys, like gut-wise, if you think about you start the game and you're looking at Savannah Elves and Cloaks, or does it depend more on who you're playing or what?
Usually when people discuss the tier list, those are always in the conversation, the Savannah Elves and the Cloaks. That doesn't surprise me.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I guess the other two that we would think of as being up in the top 5 are usually Shadow Elves and Sand Goblins. And I see Sand Goblins aren't too far off, but they're right next to Wayfarers. And then Shadow Elves, a big question mark, and it might just be because there's really only a handful of players that really have a handle on the Shadow Elves.
Right. Yeah, that could change it. Who knows?
I don't know if Aaron has any other thoughts on that, but
yeah, those are the big ones. I think we had Savannah Elves and Cloaks at like 3 and 4 in our tier list, or somewhere around there. One of them might have been swapped with Sand Gobs, but yeah, I mean those were two of our S tier factions for sure. So that definitely checks out.
Savannah Elves have been there since the beginning, like even in the days of Polar Dwarves being super broken, people were saying it was like Savannah Elves and Polar Dwarves were the two decks during the Master Set times and stuff. So, and then Polar Dwarves got a couple nerfs in like the way their events worked in general because of Eternal Council, and then later on actually nerfing the event itself.
Right.
Some of these make a lot of sense for me. There's 4 in like the negative portion that really, I think, make a lot of sense. Some I thought might have been a little more negative. One of those being Cave Goblins. I feel like Cave Goblins are a deck that catches a lot of like newer players by surprise, but a lot of the higher players are more acute on how to like actually take care of them and survive the onslaught of goblins. And
Right.
another one of those being fungal dwarves, I think, is another one that like new players might struggle to defend against, but the higher players I think have fungal dwarves pretty much in check nowadays. So
Yeah, I mean, I am surprised. So that's fungal dwarves go down 2% in elite play, and poor Koldak probably didn't deserve to lose a life, but it's not an emergency to fix. On one level, sometimes we rationalize that and said, well, yeah, in general play, but in a sure, the elite players, they who can really pilot the deck, but no, it's the elite players are even better at protecting against it. So.
And I noticed both of the new factions have a pretty big negative switch from going when you go to the top players, probably just from players learning the decks. Isle of Beckett and the Spectral Conclave.
Right. That's that's what I'm guessing is that would be a factor in that is that elite players are not elite Isle of Beckett and Spectral Conclave players yet, and yet they're playing against the elite of everything else. So it takes time.
And I would expect Spectral Conclave to come a little more to the middle, but I think they might stay in the negatives because they're very much a deck. You really have to think about how you're playing against them, and you have to be very careful. Like, I played against Orange Lazarus the other day, and he didn't trigger Depart like at all. And he played Phoenix Elves and just slaughtered me.
I had a game like that with Massimo, like my first loss with Spectral Conclave, where he was just like didn't trigger Depart the whole game, and I just couldn't get anything going.
Wow.
And so I think that will be interesting to see where they fall.
Yes, we know for sure that we don't know yet, right? That's what we've seen with other releases. But so my guess would be with you guys, you are taking care as you're playing them not to be reckless. So that means you're only giving the other player sort of depart options that would be bad for them, right? Is part of it. It's like now that doesn't necessarily help the faction at the end of the day. The solution isn't make worse decisions with them. Yeah, it all can kind of look. Let's see. If I go back to base deck, the base deck versus custom sheets, it just makes me want to look at Isle of Beckett because they're 50% in base deck, 35% in their 81 custom deck games so far.
I think people are still figuring out what to do with them in custom. I think they've got some good options, but the thing is, like, you're taking like people playing just like, I just want to try something with the Isle of Beckett, and then you're just running into like my Tundra Elf deck or Shadow Elf deck.
Right, the learning is even higher.
It's just not tuned yet, I've definitely lost to Isle of Beckett and other stuff. Like right now, Cheez-Its has been playing like a Swamp Work deck, so I'd expect that to be a high percentage. Yeah, it went up 5%, and that's just because he's been doing really well with Swamp Work. So some of this data is like really, especially in the custom, is run by a few players doing well.
Yeah, like James, I didn't know you played 1,200 Tundra Orc games in the last year, but I guess that's the stat.
Because that's the total that have been played. Oh, it's not on this spreadsheet, but I have the individual player total game info to share at some point here. So,
ooh,
it's getting even more extreme, especially when it comes to James.
But it's not just me playing Tundra Orcs. Tundra Orcs are popular in general, in part because I made them popular, but there's other people doing it too. You can see there's 1,070 Obsidian Dwarves games, and Cheez was running them a lot too. So, and that's the tricky thing is people are saying, well, deck building's all playing against these one-turn kill decks. Like, have you just been playing the same player who likes to do that? Because then that doesn't mean that's all it is. It just means that's all you're playing against right now.
Yeah, and for the Isle of Beckett, I know Cheese and a couple other people were trying to see if they can get the Y-Tide to work and just have a deck featured around throwing the 8-legged 8-attack monster out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty of experimenting to do there. And there's probably bugs too, because it's not like we systematically go through and check every common ability. And there's already one bug that I fixed.
Yeah, he's been using Waitui and Swamp Works too, and that's kind of hard to because you can merge it a couple times. So even if you kill it, it comes back.
Nick was very, that deck is one of Nick's babies, and he was very committed from the start that this thing needed to attack in all 8 directions and have an 8 strength.
It was Nick's a loot ball. He wanted 8 for everything.
Exactly.
Another thing with the Isle Vecid and the Spectral Conclave in custom versus base, I think the Spectral Conclave are very much a more intuitive custom deck. Like people can see very clearly what they want to do with that deck, where I think Isle Vecid might require a lot more experimentation of like, ooh, how can I make this good? And
Yeah.
they're both low totals, so I'm sure we'll see that change a bit. But I think people see the Spectral Conclave and they're like, oh, like I can just create an assassination deck.
Right.
Or something of the sort.
Because there's certain cards that are just kind of no-brainer good cards to put in, like Dagger, for example. If you have Dagger and Talo swapping with your illusion, suddenly you just get a lot of damage from one spot, that kind of thing.
Now, I will say overall, just looking at the overall stats, and especially the top 10% base deck stats, I do still feel really good about... I don't know what it is about the nature of Summoner Wars that keeps everything fairly close. I mean, to have our most egregious elite faction just be at 39%, and
with the Vanguards, and then most of the others are like still the filth around 56, but yeah, most of them are like between 48 and 52.
Yeah, like it's games do not usually end up like that, and it's funny because you feel like the decks play very differently, but the core principles of the game and situational play and all of that stuff do seem to maybe be more important in Summoner Wars than, maybe some other games. A tiny advantage that a faction has just snowballs into a huge matchup advantage.
Some of the core rules help lend it to that. I think just the fact that there's a limit of 3 moves and 3 attacks and stuff like that, it makes it harder to leverage an advanced board position. Because, like, let's say we had a game where you had no limits to the attacks and movements you could do. You just move and attack with everything you had out. Once you started winning, you'd win by a lot more, that kind of thing. And I think that some of the core rules of that and, like, the discarding for magic and stuff like that allows the more skilled player to figure out some way to win within their resources,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 56% at the top. And by the way, this is like Season 6 had 42,000 games, and I believe that around 15,000 of those are the top 10% players against top 10% players. So it's a lot
they're
of games.
They're just playing a whole lot.
Yes, they're playing a lot, and it's a lot of games. It's not a small sample size.
There's been a number of new players that just showed up in Season 6 and that have been doing really well. It's nice to see.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Another one of these stats that I think makes a lot of sense is the Crimson Order drops almost like 3.5% from like general play to top 10%, and I think that's another deck that the top players probably know how to deal with, maybe just a little bit better, and new players are always venting their frustration about. So
yeah, for sure, that's a good one because
the Forged have a similar drop.
Yes, and they're both like close to that 55 number where they start to feel subjectively a little bit oppressive in full play, but then they top 10%, they just go right down to we can deal with it. They're at 50%.
Meanwhile, Storm Goblins are right at 50% in both, despite how they feel like they have a lot of lopsided matchups.
And maybe they do. We'll look at that.
Yeah, maybe we can look at that next. Look at the matchups table.
Now, I will say, if we want to do that, if you go to the next sheet, the top 10% matchups, I don't think this is that useful, but I still included it. But some of these are quite low sample size. So I don't want to... I think the more useful data will be the general matchup chart, but the top 10% matchup chart, obviously for like Isle Vecid and Spectral Conclave, some of them are even single digits. Otherwise, there are some of these matchups are just like in the teens or 20s. Some of them are higher, but it could be looked at, but I didn't really spend much time looking at it because of the sample size.
No, this could be useful for us to try to generate tier lists and stuff too, because a lot of times, rather than going by feel of how strong a deck is, like Aaron and I with our tier list, we're trying to look at the matchups and then generate a tier list based on that.
I would bet if you looked at, if I regenerated the number of games for each of these top 10% matchups, you could probably pick out what the Summoner War League matchups have been, because there's probably the most of those.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow, this one's brutal. The Polar Dwarves versus Eternal Council is 84%, according to the top 10% matchups. That number sounds suspiciously close to like a round number of like 6/7 or something like that.
Yeah, it's not going to be single digits, but it'll be unless it's the two new factions. But yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah, it's interesting, but I wouldn't put too much stock in. We'd need to go further back, maybe, because this is just seasons 6 and 7, I believe.
I would think that would be a fairly even matchup.
Well, I mean, there's not many good things to steal for the Eternal Council.
Yeah, but like you don't need to steal for Eternal Council to be good, and Edia could just smack big things.
If you look at that in the all games sheet, it's at 56% for the Polar Dwarves. So that's more reasonable for sure, especially in the matchup chart. That's still fairly close. So yeah, I would say we'd probably want to look at the matchup chart of all games because it's fairly significant numbers for every matchup.
Yeah, you said that one's a 56%. Yep. If I look at that table.
Looking at this and trying to figure out the most extreme numbers, it's a lot of rows and columns at this point. I didn't run anything specific.
I mean, I can give you some extremes for probably the worst matchups, because I remember last time we talked, it was Storm Goblins versus Fungal Dwarves, and it looks like, with small sample size, I'm sure, Spectral Conclave have taken that away against the Fungal Dwarves.
Oh, with a 79%. Yep. And but the Storm Goblins versus Fungal Dwarves are still 76.
Yeah, I think it was higher than that last time, though. I think it was in the 80s, but...
So the Crimson Order versus Cave Goblins isn't as bad as we thought. That's at 63%.
Yeah. What about Wayfarers versus Cave Goblins?
38% for Wayfarers, so about the same, about a 60-40.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Is there anything below, like a 20%? Anything in teens?
Kind of glancing around. Like you said, there's a lot of cells to look at. Got so many matchups now. The one that surprised me is the Wayfarers are at 40% against Deepwood Groaks. I don't know how far back that goes.
That might go pretty far back.
Might go back to the time of the Deepwood Groaks being powerful.
Spectral Conclave versus High Elves have a very lopsided.
Which way?
Towards Conclave.
Oh yeah, 27% for 27.9 for. I was gonna look at like Tundra Orcs and see like how even their matchups are, and most of them are. Although Nestle was right, he said Crimson Order is their worst matchup, and yeah, it's at 64% for Crimson Order. Although wait, what's the 74% one? Probably Spectral Conclave. 74% Spectral Conclave versus Tundra Orcs.
Huh. So you think they? What's the factor with Spectral Conclave? Melee stuff, beefier melee stuff.
The melee stuff, because like it seems like the best play around against them is to give them as few boosts as possible. So factions that are melee heavy, especially with a melee summoner that don't have ways to force, because like Cave Goblins, I would expect not as bad, even though they're mostly melee, just because they have sneak and they have the ability to like cling guys next to the illusions without triggering depart. So if we look at like Spectral Conclave versus Cave Goblins, I would guess it's not as bad. Yeah, it's actually Cave Goblins' favor. 45% for Spectral Conclave.
Which I think makes sense.
Their worst matchups right now are Cloaks, Eternal Council.
I'm honestly surprised that Breakers are in a losing matchup against Spectral Conclave, because I feel like Breakers have a lot of good tools against Spectral Conclave.
Yeah, they got tons of range. Swamp Orcs do well against them with Filth. I think Spectral Conclave might be what people thought Storm Goblins were going to be in more polarizing matchups. As of right now, I mean, there's not as much data. But
yep, it's early.
All the melee factions are really hurting against the Conclave. Gargrath do really poorly against them.
I guess we'll see if it just can't play out. That it sounds like so far elite players are finding out that you don't get much of an advantage as an opponent from triggering depart. There's fewer ways to leverage that than maybe is intended. We'll see. From just clearing the space. It sounds, on the face of it, it sounds pretty good. I mean, you don't get magic. The thing is going to come right back, of course. But you'd think clearing the space would be kind of a good give and take. And I'm sure it is situationally, but it sounds like, in general, you want to avoid triggering.
Yeah, I mean, Wayfarers, the Spectral Conclave is only like 60% versus Wayfarers, and Wayfarers is a faction that I think does use Depart aggressively. Get them to discard the card and then hit you with a ranged unit. But then even then, to take advantage of Depart, you kind of need range. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're going to discard the card and then shoot through that empty space.
Right. So yeah, it should be a double advantage, really. Yeah, not triggering Depart and making use of it when you do trigger it.
I actually just played that matchup in the Turtle Surprise.
Yeah.
Against Devlin, and I won it with Spectral Conclave, and I didn't think it was crazy lopsided, but I basically prevented him from getting to my side of the board, which hurts Wayfarers a lot because I just had so many illusions out there that he could depart them all, but he couldn't really get to my side of the board.
Spectral Conclave, I think, will take a little bit more time for people to figure out the tactics against and how to play them better, I think, is what we're kind of saying.
Yeah, we'll see.
I don't know. Isle Vecid, I think, I'm surprised they're doing... Like, I feel like Isle Vecid are actually pretty strong, and I'll expect them to get better over time, too. Or maybe it's just because I've been playing, like, one matchup that's not good. Let's see how good that one is. I've been playing Polar Dwarves versus Isle Vecid and losing. So let's see where that's at. Polar Dwarves.
52%.
Oh, yeah, but it's saying Polar Dwarves get 48.
Yeah, Isle Vecid, a very slight advantage there so far. I mean, they're right at 50% overall. Yeah, well, let's see. What is their best and worst stuff? They're also kind of weak versus Wayfarers.
I think I gotta just, in testing, start advocating for more Fungal Dwarf factions that Fungal Dwarfs can beat, because man, all these new factions are just slaughtering Fungal Dwarfs. Isle Vecid have a 2/3 win rate against them.
Yeah, Isle Vecid's like worst matchup appears to be Eternal Council, which makes sense because you can steal Island's Might.
Oh yeah, pretty good. Man, I've been surprised in games against when I'm Eternal Council, because I play a lot of Eternal Council, how good players will just not play an event, period, or at least not any event that could advantage you at all. And you're just feel like a sucker for holding on to that, waiting for a decent active event to show up.
Yeah, I mean, like, my rule with Eternal Council depends on when you get the learns, but I'll usually want to, like, play one just for the boost, and then another to try to steal if there's something good to steal. So you're not holding on to it forever, but you're also kind of, like, open to trying to steal. One time I was like, I really want to steal Sacrificial Pyre against the Fallen Kingdom, and they just didn't draw their Sacrificial Pyre till, like, their last 5 cards. And I was sitting on a learn forever like a chump.
Now, it does look like for the Isle Vecid, their best matchup, period, right now, not like relative to their, but just period, is against the Savannah Elves, 65%.
Fungal Dwarfs is higher.
Fungal Dwarfs like 66.
Okay. But right up there, the
Savannah Elves. So why would that be?
I don't know.
I mean, that's interesting. A bit of knowledge if you're like, oh, I'm trying to counter Savannah Elves. It might be...
I don't think it's the lower life, because Phoenix Elves, they're only 48% against them.
The Isle Vecid are surprisingly not really an assassination deck, despite what Rokomoko looks like he wants to do.
They're the king of pokes.
Yeah, they can poke. I think they're really good at not being in border archer range. You know what I mean? So you can kind of hit them and then hide somewhere. So you have to force the border archers to move to get their advantage.
Yeah. To control what the targets are, where and when, huh?
They're also like the king of firing down a single lane, because they can fire 2-3 attacks sometimes down a single lane. So that makes Lionesses not near as good.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yep.
So they're good at taking out those expensive commons, basically.
Yeah, that's definitely an advantage. That makes a lot of sense.
What's this time limit sheet? What's that?
I was just looking at that.
So that is, you guys asked for this, 45-minute games versus 3-day games. And I put in the header, there's been 179,000. And this is base deck, I believe. It looks like to me. Yeah. So since 2024, 179,000 3-day games and 15,000 45-minute games. So it's kind of comparable to custom deck as far as it's like a little under 10%.
James,
what's up?
You are not going to like the bottom. Don't scroll.
The bottom? Wayfarers, they're worse than 45-minute games?
They're the worst one in 45 minutes.
Yeah, they go down.
That's James's 45-minute go-to.
Yeah, they're 7% worse. I don't know if that's James's fault or not, but they're not the worst overall, but they're the worst drop.
And Storm Goblins have the biggest increase, it looks, or one of the bigger increases.
That must be the thinkiness of playing against them, right? Of trying to not leave gaps in the wrong places and whatnot.
Somehow High Elves are third best, which is completely counterintuitive because you think High Elves are too hard to play.
Yeah, so overall, I'm not seeing a huge. There's only a couple standouts in the time limit difference. The Storm Goblin's pretty huge, really, for some reason. 7% is pretty big.
I'm also surprised to see Obsidian Dwarves doing worse in 45-minute games. That's another one I thought it would do better. But
I don't know what's controlling that, but it doesn't seem overall. Like my overall conclusion, just from looking at these, is you've got over 80% of the decks are within 3% or within 4% of 3 days and 45 minutes. So it's definitely not the big swing that it could have been. For whatever reason, Storm Goblin, Spectral Conclave, which is pretty small sample size for 45-minute games, and in High Elf.
the seasons one is looking at which season had the most games played.
I included the days, which were sobering of how much slower we're getting over time.
Well, season 1 you started in the middle of the season of when it was released.
Right. But so then the next 3 seasons, even it really gets slower over time. So season 2, 104 days, then 115, 120, 149, and now 166. So
yeah, that's almost half a year or close to it. Yeah.
So yeah, that's just how it's going over time. It's probably more helpful to look at the very first sheet, which is just games per week, and you can kind of see how we've progressed over time, which is sort of a slow but steady rise.
And even now, like, I think it's interesting. The games a day has gone up during this season, or maybe it's just because it started this season. But it seems
I'm not sure. You can see from the seasons that the unique users in just 20 days we have 643 different people played online games. And so really even though that's like 10% of the full length of the last season, it's already got over a third of full players. But that's because at the beginning everyone plays, and then we'll add less and less players every day, new players who haven't played in the season. So that might also relate to the games per day too, because if you look at our games per week, we back in early 2022 it was like, it looks like probably 300-ish per day. And then this might be the accurate way to look at this chart, might be to half it based on how I ran the data. That sounds right to me, although I'm not sure. So more like 150 games a day, which I do think is what we had early on. Oh, that's a week. Oh, never mind. I probably did have it.
Yeah, that's a week.
Yeah, this is per week. So this is probably about right. We were hitting about 2,000. If I'm right, then we were hitting about maybe 2,000 games, or a little under that, per week before releasing these new factions. And then, of course, there's always a little boost, and you can see we hit a peak of probably 2,800. I guess you could look at the actual number, but what is the highest number? It's 2,807, which is probably just the week or the week after that the app released, extra bump there. Overall, sort of a gradually increasing chart, which is kind of encouraging to see. That I think the app doesn't bring in a ton of revenue, but we also have a very stable subscription service that really, for the last few cycles, has just stayed about the same. I mean, of course, we lose 70 people, we gain 70 people. I think the online component really helps that and keeps people engaged.
Yeah.
So it slowly rises over time and still seems to be slowly rising.
Oh, and then so this all games is like telling us which factions are most popular.
Yes, this is all games since the beginning of 2024. You can see their win percentage, but also how many times they've been played. And I think
Crimson Order.
Yep, Crimson Order really
tending
popular.
to see the newer stuff for sure, because let me see. Season 4 started on January 15th, 2024. Okay, so Crimson Order are actually before that, and Mountain Vargath.
Obsidian Dwarves and Phoenix Elves are also very popular, it looks like.
Yeah, so they are both available for a free faction. That could be a factor there. So are Mountain Vargath too, so that helps them. I'm sure that helps all those factions. If I look at the top numbers, get boosted up a little. Of course, it shouldn't help that much because, as I said, in Season 6, the top 10 games just between the top 10% players were like a little over a third of all the games. So,
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a huge factor. But it is interesting. It's 2024 to present. So yeah, it's a little hard to read that data because
Some factions didn't exist yet, you know.
but then they got played extra when they were new, but did that make up for it? I don't know. Now, another thing you guys asked about that I got a chart on is the first player sheet. And
Ooh.
overall, I feel like these effects are smaller than they used to be. You can see right in the middle is the grand total, so that's just his first player is 50.27%.
So 0.35%, we can point that number out to people. 0.35% advantage for first player, which is less than chess by a lot.
Something going on with this chart. I think there are maybe some. This is going to be close, but it's not perfect because there may be. Because if you look at grand total, it adds up to a little bit more than 50%. But there may be some games who didn't have it properly, and that's messing up some stuff. That could be the factor there. There may have been a bug at some point where it wasn't recorded correctly for posterity, because it's only for historical purposes. Like the place I'm pulling this from is not.
Oh, you also put top 10% players in there too.
Yes, so it seems to be slightly better. Although once again, maybe this isn't total trustworthy since it still adds up to a little more than 50%, but that does read right to me as far as in the top 10% players, it's just slightly more.
So also looking at this, like factions that like to go second, according to this, is like Shadow Elves have a 2.7% advantage when going second, and Storm Goblins have a similar advantage.
Yeah, I could see Storm Goblins making some sense from, I don't even know why exactly, but you can just see them caring one way or another.
Because you get closer. You get closer and then you can shock more things.
Right.
And meanwhile, like the Wayfarers are up top with a 3% advantage when going first. And Savannah Elves, the one that's kind of well known, is still only a 3% advantage when going first. So
yeah.
So this is interesting data. I like that because people are always saying that there's a big difference.
Yeah, another one used to be Cave Goblins when I first ran these numbers like a long time ago. So now they just have like a 1.5% advantage going first. And I wonder if it's just there's so many more matchups and so many more different situations happening that's shaved these numbers down a little bit.
Yeah, and it's curious how these are a lot less than people perceive them, because based off like the league data, I think people ran the numbers at one point, and Savannah Elves were like an 8% or something, based off going first or something, and only a 3% I think is very much within reason.
There's just a finite number of matchups that can hit in the league, right? So it's going to tend to be a little swingier, I would think.
For sure, and it's smaller sample size.
It is, but it's very strong play. So I mean, it's definitely useful. But like, I would for sure trust the result of the week's games, the week's matchup, as making sense as far as who has the advantage in that individual matchup over any number I can come up with. Yeah, the first player, it's going to be, if the Savannah Elves look good, it's going to be about, what have their matchups been? And of course, I don't know how many seasons you're going back or anything for the league.
The other question I have is, with this first player thing, is this going back all the way? Because the Deeper Grok still have a pretty high win rate, so I'm guessing it is probably like most of the history of the game on this chart.
This must go back. That must mean it's 2024. So I believe everything I spit out was either all of 2024 or just seasons 6 and 7.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because there was somewhere in here. Oh, if season 6, I have all-time win, which I don't know if that's really all-time win or since 2024. But yes, you could see the season 6 advantage. It's all very boring, except the Deepwood Croaks. Go from 55% to 47%.
That's a significant change, yeah.
Everything else is a tiny, tiny tweak, but
47's still like within reason though, so it's good to see they haven't dropped.
Well, we do have a starting setup that people have been working on and play testing, and so we will probably still try that in public before locking in what we do. I don't don't even know if it's intended to help or what, but
I think it's just intended to reduce the first player advantage, which Deepwood Groks were like third or fourth on that other chart. So
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is a sign that we should be careful with that. I mean, it definitely gets the job done as far as it achieves the goal of lowering their win rate. We don't need them to. They could still be good. They could still even win, on the high end.
Maybe that starting setup change will improve their overall win rate by like 1 or 2%.
That would be great.
After this, So then we were like,
that would be great, and it's good to take our time. I mean, I think we will have to have a discussion, probably on the playtest server, a Discord server, what to do with Blood Summon, Filth, and all that stuff very soon, and try to get that stuff up soon.
Yeah, we were curious. We were talking with some of the other custom deck players, and we were curious if you guys would be open. People who don't know, sometimes at the end of a cycle, people who haven't played the deck will like come in and just test the deck a lot.
Mhm.
And I know Vexer's done that in the past, but we were curious if you guys would do something similar with like just deck building, with just like a couple players come in and just deck build it the entire time and see what they can.
That would be great, because it also helps with bugs too,
because I've got a couple players that don't really do base deck, but would like to test just deck building for a bit, and I could.
I'm sure Cheese It and Game Bear would be happy to play their 1,000 deck building games that they do.
Well, yeah, speaking of somebody playing a lot of games, let me pull out. So this is not in you guys' sheet.
The secret sheet.
It's not technically sensitive data, I guess, but it's just feels like stuff that nobody's explicitly said. Yeah, tell people.
I'd be interested to see how some of these new players have been playing, because like there's a guy, Dead Sands, that had been very good, but also already played a lot of games. Like you just can't not run into him in season 6.
So right now, what I've got is 460,918 games played since the beginning of 2022. Now, it's actually half of that is raw games.
Okay.
There's 2 players in each game, right? So at the top of the list is James with 5,578 games.
A lot of games.
Checks out.
Think about the raw. The fair thing, I think, would be to divide that by the full 460,000, but it's still more than 1% of all games. If you divided that in half, then it's more than 2%, which is kind of crazy.
James plays 2% of the
There's
games.
also 2 other players who are over 5,000, so
I don't even know if I'm half that.
You're on 2,000, you thought, right, Aaron?
Yeah, I think last time we talked, I was like 2.5 or something, somewhere around half there.
You're at a mere 1,800, actually. Only 46th overall.
Wow.
But 1,800 is 46th overall.
Now, this is from the start of 2022, which we were in sort of more of an alpha stage before that.
What about Magnifico?
Magnifico, number 8 overall with 3,713.
Yeah. Makes sense.
The top 2, I don't think this is a bug. I think the number 3 overall player being cute with their username. Do you guys know who that would be? Can you guess what that username would be?
Oh, Opponent?
Opponent, yes.
Yeah, that's the guy who used to be called Doug. Yeah, he plays a lot.
Okay, yeah, I thought that might be the case. Yes, it's using their number ID, so it's catching all their games, not just the new stuff. So yeah, that's there, and then someone I don't know about, but you guys might know, JJ Lemake is the other 5,000 game player. So the interesting thing, I think, is to go down and see if I look at like how many people have played exactly one online game.
Oh.
Since the start of 2022, it looks like we've had 6,891 players. Over 1,400 people who've played exactly one game.
Lost to JJ LeMay. I'm out of here.
And also probably a lot of those are timeouts too, like played a turn. Or started the game and never even played a turn. A similar number. I mean, if you just went with people who've played, let's say, less than 10 games, that's looking like about 4,800. There are 2,6,100 players who have played 10 or more games. So people who actually went and tried to make playing Summoner Wars part of their online habits.
How do we increase that number, Joe?
Man, good question. Good question. Yeah, I know you guys asked for some stats that were too hard for me to pull as far as like, oh, if you get the right deck.
Fuzzy was asking, I think, and some other people were asking, which is the best starter deck for retaining players? How many games do people play before they get their first online win?
That would be interesting to look at. I mean, in theory, people should be playing somewhat newish people.
If they're new too, yeah.
But that's only if they choose a fair matchup, and then they have to wait. So it's a give and take. That would be, as far as what deck you get if you stick around, that would be a lot of work.
Figure out what people are getting.
Doubt it would be that interesting. I doubt that there would be, so I probably wouldn't do that work. But seeing how long it takes someone to get a win would be interesting. Even just to tell players that, like, oh, don't worry, it takes the average person 4 games before they get a win, you know. Yeah, if you look at it, it's just 2,000 players. I mean, we have just digital subscribers between the web and the apps, probably close to 800 subscribers. And you'd think you wouldn't just keep that around if you weren't playing. Although I guess you could play just single player and still find it to be worth it. But that doesn't even include the, 13 or 1,400 full subscribers that also all have access, but it's hard to guess what percentage of them have even played online. I'm sure that probably at least half of them haven't even opened the app. They just like the physical game.
Joe, does that data that you were pulling include the most common or most played and least played common and champ?
That's what I've been trying to pull, but I keep getting errors JavaScript. Unfortunately, this one is with JavaScript, which has its limitation.
No worries.
It's gonna take longer because I'm gonna have to make it run like a few thousand at a time, then run a script to just combine the data. So it's the full game database, which includes all Summoner Wars games, all Summoner War playtest games, and all Forgotten Waters remote app games. It's like 27 gigs of data, and I'm guessing that probably 15 to 20 of those gigs are just the Summoner Wars games. So each game is a lot. Each game is like a megabyte of data by the time it's done, because it has a full log. It has the starting state, the ending state, and a full log of moves. It's overloading my little node JavaScript. So I either have to go figure out how to increase the memory limit of that, or figure out how to make sure it's dumping things out of memory as it does each game or something. So I'm not going to be able to figure out on this podcast how to finish that. That's good, because once I do figure it out, I can make sure it's the more useful data, which would be, instead of just how many raw times a champ was summoned or a common was summoned, see how many times they are summoned per game that they're in. You know what I mean? A lot more interesting. I mean, if there's a less popular faction, obviously their champs are going to be summoned less and whatnot. So yeah, I'll keep working on that data.
We appreciate it. I know the community had pushed for this a little bit, and I know you had mentioned it in some last podcasts, but what about when's the coding stream coming up?
I'm going to do that whenever I code the squirrels. Our next playtest deck, which is the end of week.
The Dre.
Now, the only thing is, I definitely don't want people to think of it too much as spoilers, because, as you guys know,
things will change.
Yeah, and this is definitely an experimental deck. Some decks are more straightforward, and we know going in, and some decks are like trying something, and these guys are definitely trying something.
Adding the new acorn token to the game.
And the acorn rules card.
You actually have to find acorns and use real acorns. They don't come with the game.
So people can get a look at them if they want. Of course, only not that many people are going to pay attention to a coding stream. As soon as I figure out what day I'm going to do that, should be within the next 2 weeks. I'll let people know, and you see my insane spaghetti code where I built this game before I really had a good understanding of how to code a turn-based strategy game. So I have dreams of going back and rewriting it all, but I don't think it is possible. But I'll tell you what, this would be a good first step, so I can go do that coding and people will see it, and we'll see if there's people who know what they're talking about on there, like to communicate with, because I have thought about maybe starting like open source project about running the logic of a turn-based strategy game, because now I have all these ideas about the best way to do it. From that, I could, if there's other people helping, then that could be a path to sort of rewriting the logic. It would be like a generalized library. It would be a Summoner Wars specific secondary library to work on to use the system. There is Jinteki, the Netrunner system. I've looked over their code and it looks really solid. We also have Ashteki, which uses its code base for ashes, and I know that it doesn't seem to be as riddled with bugs as Summoner Wars Online with each new release. I looked at it and it was just a glance, but for one thing, I don't think there is a generalized library for Netrunner for like Jinteki of like I think the person who made Ashteki just took the Jinteki code and stripped out the Netrunner and added in the ashes, you know what I mean? Versus like, oh, here's like I use boardgame.io to manage the data and the communication with a server. Like it's you could code any game to do that. So this would be that, but for specifically kind of geared for the logic of a strategy card game
that has a spatial component too, which is also
there's that too. This would be the first step if I code, and if people are interested and there's people to talk about it with, could start dreaming about the other thing. For any coders who are listening, like I looked at the Jinteki code and the Ashteki code, and it's also very codery, kind of very programming-y type of strategy where you have inheritance and you're running functions for each effect, whereas what I'm imagining is much more, you'd type out the data for a unit, so you'd have its name, and you'd have its stats, and you'd have its ability, and each ability would also essentially just have a list of attributes. And if you just put in all the right attributes, the ability would just work. So basically, I like a list of things.
Going with that, I mean, I'm not much of a coder at all, but one thing I was thinking about is if you ever think you're gonna like revamp the UI a bit in terms of just like letting people know about effects in like shorter ways than the text would do, you know, like maybe if there's like a symbol for like forcing or for opponent's unit or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Try to curb the number of emails I get from where I just have to be like, oh yeah, you didn't. The last one, this is just not trying to call this person out. I get them every day, but it's the last one I got was the Mind Mage or whatever it's called for the Spectral Conclave. Somebody copied it. They weren't playing the Spectral Conclave. They copied it with a Mind Witch. They're like, there's something wrong. I can't take over this unit. And I'm like, oh, you don't have a magic. So it's always that. Of course, protect.
I mean, I think I sent one you a long time ago, but it was, I like had Thune in Codex Diamond and I forgot about it. And I was like, why did Thune gain an extra boost from the unit dying? You were like, oh, it was in Codex Diamond. I was like, oh, yep, that checks out.
People should still send us questions in, because then sometimes they catch bugs, you know, and then that's how we get them fixed. So but if I had better communication about what's happening, Protector is probably the best.
Protect, I think it's called, for the one on Citadel Knight and the Mind Warden.
You know, that's probably the best example where people are just like, what's happening? And then they blame themselves once they figure it out, but it could definitely be communicated better why they can't attack the thing they thought they could attack. That's on the list, and that, I mean, when we talk about getting new players to stick and stuff, that wouldn't hurt, right? For sure. We gotta see, I'm kind of amazed. Time just opened up to me. I had to invest so many hours in doing the new factions and getting the deck builder ready for the Ashes Kickstarter. I mean, I didn't code it from scratch. It's from a fan deck builder, but there's still a lot of work to do. I just felt like I was under the gun, and then like all of a sudden, since we launched the Kickstarter, I'm doing tasks that have been on the back burner forever. Some of them very boring, like let's get shipping API working better and stuff like that. But so you never know. I don't know what's going to come. I also finally have time to work on game development, which has been it's been quite a long time since I did any outside of Summoner War.
Nice. You got a new game in the works, Joe?
I have a game we signed where I'm sort of the lead developer on, and it will be, I mean, we're making it, our next expandable 2-player PvP game. It is far outside, like if you think of Crystal Clans as one of the closer-ish games to Summoner Wars out there, as far as big, high concept of it, you know. It is not like that. It is like way outside of Ashes and Summoner Wars. It's really in its own zone.
And not Super Auto Pets?
Oh, and not Super Auto Pets. Yeah, that's true. Super Auto Pets is a PvP expandable game. So, yeah, sorry, I guess I misspoke. And Super Auto Pets also does not in the same zone as either of those games. So we will have 4 games covering 4 very different corners of the 2-player card game world. So that's kind of cool. No, this is still early. Super Auto Pets is all Nick. It's very polished already. And plus, of course, the graphic design was like in art. Well, there was no art because the art's already done for us. There's no art to do, is what I mean. Since it's based on a video game, for those who don't know, yeah, the graphic design is also based on the video game. So that all has been coming together very fast. This game is going to be a bit of work, and I finally have time to put in the work on it. So
Ash's Kickstarter looks like it was doing pretty well.
Yes, I don't think it's a big deal. In fact, I think we mentioned it on the tournament stream the other day. It is very likely that there's going to be some kind of Summoner Wars Kickstarter in 2026, just because this is a really good way to get the word out about Ashes, and it's been very successful. I mean, so it might only end up with about the same number of backers as our last Kickstarter for Wandering Galaxy. But if it does, it'll have double the money.
Bigger pledges makes for a difference.
That was the lesson. So our next Kickstarter will be for Super Auto Pets, but for all I know, it could get 20,000 backers or something. But as far as backers per pledge, I mean, it's going to have a very low ceiling because it's like a $20 game. We'll have a couple expansions available, but those will also be cheap.
For Summoner Wars, you could have people going back and getting everything.
Well, yeah. So on this Ashes Kickstarter, the all-in, I mean, you can back for just $50, and you get it's totally playable with 2 decks PvP and the new Dragonborn PvE enemy. You get everything to play both modes in one box, which has never existed before for Ashes. There's 224 people who are paying us $500 to get every Ashes product.
I think one of the cool things about that all-in pledge that I have not seen in any other Kickstarters is it says it's going to come packaged in the big box.
Yes.
Normally, when there's a big box solution for Kickstarters that I've been a part of, they'll send you everything in other boxes and then send you the big box, and you have to package it yourself. Right,
yeah. So the thing is with this is that some stuff has run out of print, like all the deluxe sets with the 3 newer dice types, gone out of print. And so rather than using like the all-ins as a way to meet like a minimum quantity to reprint everything, we're using this print-on-demand system so that, well, this stuff is sort of always in print. You can get, and you don't even have to, buy it. If you just want 3 or 4 cards from it, you can just build a custom deck and get those. So yeah, so therefore, yeah, so we're not using the Kickstarter to like do full reprints of a billion different decks. That's why the stuff ends up being in the box, which is very convenient. We don't know what all would be in a Summoner Wars Kickstarter next year. We don't know for sure if there will be some giant box for people who want it, but there is in this Ashes campaign, and there's nothing stopping you
from buying the box and putting nothing in it.
And putting whatever you want in it. Self-making a Summoner Wars sticker and slapping that on the front and filling it up to your heart's content. It's a good box. It's got, I think, 4 full card wells. For sure, Ashes currently has more cards than Summoner Wars because Ashes didn't restart from scratch. It kept the old decks when we went independent, and plus it has a tray with like 12 wells that each hold, I think, 18 dice, and then another tray with like 4 or 5 wells for tokens and stuff. So whether for Summoner Wars, Ashes, or any other card game that you just have way too big of a collection of, would not be a bad general investment.
Yeah, it's a great box. But I want to touch on one more thing before we wrap up the podcast. Joe, how do you think the tariffs are going to affect Plaid Hat in general and like the future of Ashes, Summoner Wars, the games that you guys create?
I mean, there's no question that they're a negative. I mean, easily by a long shot. There's nothing good about them. We want them to go away. Something people should get a deep understanding of is you pay the tariff based on what you bought the goods for. On Ash's Kickstarter, on content and stuff, I've seen some people but it's from China, and so are you going to triple the price now? Well, no, you wouldn't. Even worst case scenario, it wouldn't triple the price of things, because we're paying a box costs $50 retail. That means the retailer has to buy it for $25. That means the distributor probably bought it for
13 or something.
Their margin is smaller, but they might have bought it for 20, and there's a fulfillment cut too. So, with shipping, we might have ended up paying $10 for it ourselves, right? And so, if you expect the customer to shoulder part of the blame, they might be shouldering $6-7 of that, on a $50 product.
So a $50 game might be a $60 game instead.
Exactly.
It's going to go up 20%.
Exactly. We are currently, for the moment, we're fortunate because we don't have anything arriving here. The next thing I think will be, I don't know if it'll be the next Ashes and Summoner Wars set or just the next Ashes set. That's something that's a little bit higher margin by nature. Direct sales help us in that category too. I know for us, we're a little more willing to eat as much of the extra cost as we can. I know that we have reduced our manufacturing costs recently. Colby works hard on that. So that, unfortunately, just means that what should have been more profit gets eaten up by tariffs. But it means that, we're also not a company that's in some kind of Kickstarter death spiral. Any company that has been doing mega Kickstarters for years and is 3 campaigns behind in delivery, it could easily be the nail in the coffin for them. They are bad. They're bad for us. Don't mind saying that they're bad for America and Americans in general. We're fighting through it, and I just hope that cooler heads prevail by the time we get stuff, for sure. If you're thinking about backing Ashes, there is a detailed explanation of. So we have that, and people have really appreciated. A lot of people have even commented hey, I'd be happy to pay more on you guys' behalf if these tariffs didn't change and things like that. So people are understanding and stuff, but it's bad. And if you're limping along, it could easily kill you. So
yeah, it sounds like there's some board game companies that will definitely be taking hits or closing doors. Sounds like you guys planned fairly well, so glad to hear that. And if it sounds like you guys aren't planning on increasing subscription costs for Summoner Wars, but if you did, it probably would be marginal, $5 or less, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's definitely not currently in the plan. But of course, there would be some number, right? Which the tariffs were 500%. We can't lose money on every single shipment.
Yeah.
We are also looking into every possibility of our manufacturer has other locations in other countries, and that also, even though that number is just at 10% at the moment, who knows what it'll be when stuff ships. We don't know. That's one of the worst parts of it, is how unpredictable it is. It's very bad for American business. It sucks. So we're doing our best, and we're in a decent position. Games like Ashes and Summoner Wars are also well positioned to be, in particular, subscriptions, which are direct sales. So therefore higher margin, they're well positioned for us to be able to eat it a little bit, Well,
I'm glad to hear it, that it won't affect Plaid Hat or cause you guys to stop producing the games that we love or shut doors in any near time future. So that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, it also doesn't hurt that the Ashes is going so well, which, like I said, is not even really because of some explosion of growth of our audience. It's really because people are telling us, yes, I want to give you, on average, $167 for this product. When Wandering Galaxy was making $79 on average, I thought that was incredible. The game was $60 on the Kickstarter. People were spending an extra $20 on average. Wow. And now it's just you could back us for $50 and people are backing for over $160 on average. They're giving us well over $100 more than that.
some of the like game founds and Kickstarters are insane for averages if you get into different niches of like the board games community. Like I backed one on GameFound that's like a miniature campaign. I think their average is like $500 a backer, which is crazy.
There are almost sort of two different sort of genres, like the miniature games. I understand people are doing it for the miniatures, right? In a lot of cases.
Yeah, this isn't even a game. This is just miniatures.
It's just mini. So there's even that, and then but there's also a category of games that are really mostly the miniatures.
Yeah, yep, for sure.
And that's great for people who are into that, and that can definitely rack it up. But yeah, I mean, we mentioned it on the we're thinking about for Summoner Wars, possibilities for more physical play stuff, maybe solo mode, maybe campaign. Colby, after we got off the tournament stream the other day, Colby was like, "Oh, what if we did this with a 2-player campaign? And this and this." Could see some fun stuff happening where it's not for the veterans. It's not just get a storage solution or whatever. Or some deluxe stuff. It's something exciting for them too, but I also think it would just have a lot of potential because Summoner Wars, for sure, is more approachable than Ashes, just less complex, period. And I do think has a notch more name recognition for the general board game crowd who's browsing crowdfunding platforms. I guess has less of a reputation as it's a 2-player, Magic the Gathering-ish. That having that genre for Ashes cuts off a portion of the audience who are just like, oh, that's not me. And Summoner Wars is able to reach outside of that audience a little more. Ashes doing well helps, and hopefully we could do something similar with Summoner Wars next year.
Yeah, I know you guys were talking about adding a campaign mode or something. That sounds neat. I think just having a map of Etheria for people to look at would be cool too.
Well, that's what Colby's biggest idea was after we got off the call was, you have a map and it's involved in the campaign, right? So I know there's a lot of people who just play with one other person, right? And that's who that is really for. Like they have someone in their household or something and they play all the time, but it's just the two of them. Like that's kind of the idea of what it would be, is something where you could get something a little extra out of that situation, or incentivize people to find that situation for themselves.
I think it'd be neat if you could make it like a dude on a map game to some extent, with its own little rules, tweaks. Like maybe when the Fallen Kingdom wins a battle, they get extra units in their territory or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've been tossing around making a football variant, so.
Oh, nice! I would play that.
Ever since that conversation we had on the one podcast about what Summoner Wars team would make the best football team,
I've dreamed about there should be a game, Star Wars Rebellion, but every time that you have a battle, you play a game of X-Wing, and like just that silliness. But it's actually, it would be within the scope because you wouldn't do it all in one sitting. It would be kind of a thing you play over the course of a couple months, and somehow have it evolve and have a story to it that affects games. It'd be cool.
Well, Joe, we appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's fun to come on. I'll keep working on that Common and Champion script, and if I get a result from it, I'll just send it to you guys for your discussion on your next episode or whatever, because that will be
Sounds
just
good.
fun to see who, especially for champs, because I just don't think champs don't always get as much discussion since they are impactful, but on a macro scale, they're not as impactful, right? Because they're not as reliable. So it'd be interesting to see that kind of info. I'll try to get that to you guys. It's really fun talking about Summoner Wars stats.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yep, let me know what other questions, if this leads to other interesting questions, this would be fun to do again. I was very doubtful yesterday when I went in to start building the stats if I'd be able to find them, and it turned out I was able to find a lot more info than I thought. So
This has been another episode of Discard for Magic, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks.